Hello and happy June to everyone tuning in. If we haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, I'm Clarissa Constantine. I'm the founder of the Parent Tween Connection. We are where parents go when they don't know where to go. I'm excited to come live with you today with Jennifer Boudrye of Queer Allyship. She's the founder of Queer Allyship. Because as you may know, June is Pride Month. And it's Pride Month, not just here in the US or in North America, but in many places around the world. It's actually commemorating the Stonewall riots and really working to support folks who find themselves in the LGBTQIA community, whether themselves or with their families. So, Jennifer, thank you for being with me. I'm super excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
With a little bit, like a brief background about how it is that you found yourself founding organizations and companies and supports for families who are in the LGBTQ plus community.
Sure. I want to make this as short as I can. I keep trying to make it shorter and shorter. But I spent 17 plus years as a school librarian working with kids as I was raising my own children. My youngest is 28 now, and my oldest is 34, if I can do math. And so working with with children and their families through all of these years, recognizing that parents need more support. I know that I did as a parent. So I took a shift and got my certification as a parent coach, started working with parents and realized that my niche was really parents of LGBTQ plus youth, because my son is bisexual, very proudly bisexual, and my partner's son is trans. So I have a bi guy and a trans guy. And those are really the two most marginalized under the LGBTQ plus community. And I had also been working with a nonprofit in Loudoun County, Virginia, doing a lot of advocacy work and training around LGBTQ support and understanding. So they just came together. And now under Queer Allyship, I really kind of do three things. I do Parent with Care. I work with parents of LGBTQ plus kiddos. I have an internet resource directory called Queer Camp Fair, where parents can find affirming camps. And then Human with Care, which is really all of the realm of organizations and companies and all of that. So we'll be talking mostly about Parent with Care today.
That's awesome. And, one of the reasons that I love bringing in such a diversity of professionals is families deal with all kinds of things. We never know what an individual family is navigating, especially families with teenagers. The foundation of Parent Tween Connection actually came about when a close friend of mine was navigating some really challenging stuff with her daughter, who was 15. And one of the biggest things that she said was, I need a place to go where I can talk to other parents, number one, who've been there and done that, and who aren't going to judge me and my family for what's going on. And so I love bringing in this array of professionals because we all bring such different perspectives. And yet, when you propose the title for our talk of like how to support your LGBTQ plus kiddo, even if you don't know that you have one, I imagine that much of what we're about to talk about is going to apply to cisgendered, straight, heteronormative relationships as well. And so even for anyone tuning in, even if you don't think you're navigating the LGBTQ plus arena, stay tuned, because you never know, number one, when you might. And number two, you're probably going to learn stuff even in a quote unquote more typical environment as well.
Sure.
So one of the buzzwords, and I hate to use that term, but it's a term that we hear a lot. So that's why I use that phrase, that we hear a lot in today's culture, is identity, particularly around gender identity. And so I think about, like, when I identify myself, well, I'm Clarissa. I'm cisgendered female. I'm a musician. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a tutor. Like, there's all these different aspects. And gender is one of those pieces. So let's start with that, because I think that's a place that a lot of people don't get. They confuse terms. They confuse the terms sex and gender interchangeably and whatnot. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to you. Where do we start with this conversation?
All right. I love it. So we start with biology, right? So a sex that a child is assigned comes from when the doctor declares it, right? You see that first sonogram, or you wait for the surprise. The doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl, right? So in our brains, we automatically assign who that person could be based on that, right? So that's the sex. And we say there's sex that they are assigned or designated at birth because that's what we know, right? Gender identity is an intrinsic knowledge of who you are. You flipped over and said, I'm a cisgender woman. So what that means is that you were born female. You were told that your parents were told that you were female, and you feel like you're female, right?
Mm-hmm.
Transgender means there are people who are born and assigned with one sexual identity, but feel other than, right? So trans means on the other side of other than, anything other than aligned. So parents are often curious about how young children know their identity, their gender identity. And research says around age 3 that kiddos are clear about their gender identity. They know that feeling. And when people say, well, how do you know? I'm going to ask you, Clarissa, are you left-handed or right-handed?
Right-handed.
How do you know?
Because my handwriting is way better with my right hand than with my left. And I feel a lot more comfortable writing with my right hand than I do with my left.
So everything in your world is around you being right-handed. And you probably don't even think about it unless somebody handed you left-handed scissors and you'd be like, that feels weird. That doesn't quite work, right? Gender identity is that same intrinsic knowledge of yourself. It is just that feeling of, this is right. I'm also a cisgender female. I know that I have not questioned that. I have no doubt that I am. But I will have a couple stories that I always share. So if people have seen me in other places, they've already heard some of these. But my bonus son is transgender, and he is married to a cisgender woman, and they have a now 2-year-old son who is so adorable. And when his wife was pregnant, he came back with a sonogram that was showing genitalia, and he was like, oh, it's a boy. And my first thought was, is it? Like, you of all people, a transgender male, know that penis does not equal boy necessarily as far as gender identity. Okay.
Sure.
He didn't start transitioning until age 25. So, and he's now 35. So it just demonstrated to me how deeply socialized even a transgender man is to associate the gender that they're declared with the gender that they are, right?
Right.
The other piece that people also then get confused about is gender expression, which is your external, the way that you show yourself to the world. So that, whereas gender identity is on a scale of maleness to femaleness, gender expression is feminine to masculine and anywhere in between. Right. So you have somebody, I am a cisgender female. Right now, I'm not dressed very femininely. I'm wearing a, t-shirt and a shirt. I'm dressed somewhere in the middle. Sometimes I might feel very feminine and just really feminine it up. Other times, yesterday I had a baseball cap and sweats on, so I was feeling much more masculine. So those things are not always connected. So someone who identifies as male may be feeling very female on a certain day and decide to wear a skirt. May be feeling very feminine rather. May decide to wear a skirt. So there are different pieces of this. Sexual orientation, whole different thing. May or may not have anything to do with gender identity. So I used to describe it as a puzzle, right? Where we had different pieces that fit together. I now really kind of look at it more like a kaleidoscope, because things are falling into place, different pieces of who you are. And I think the other thing that confuses parents is that kids can change their identity, right, as they're going through life. And I hear a lot, it's because of social media. Social media is like bringing all of this on. What social media is doing is bringing a lot more visibility, a lot more language, a lot more awareness. And so, like I said, we've got a kid who's 3 years old who knows internally that they are one gender or another. If their family and society are giving them support, right, if they're transgender, they might grow up being very confident in being a transgender kid. If they get a lot of messaging, which we all do, that they are to remain the gender that they were assigned at birth, they might suppress that, right, or might deny that to themselves. I have a good friend who started her transition at age 55. And she's able to look back and say, oh my gosh, it was so obvious. How did I not know? And the reality is she didn't have access to the language, to the models, the visibility to be able to make the changes necessary. She's now fully transitioned medically and surgically, and it's incredibly happy with who she is.
Well, and it's interesting that we're talking about this in the context of the LGBTQ plus arena, right? Because this happens in innumerable other ways in our world, you know, whether it's like you get tired of the job that you're in, or you and your partner grow apart. You grow in one direction, your partner grows in another, and the next logical step is a separation or a divorce. And I'm not here judging one way or the other. I'm just saying, like, as humans, we grow and evolve. So why wouldn't it be the case that that could happen in our humanness, like in our gender or sexuality as well? Like, it makes sense that that could be a thing to me.
Yeah. And I think it's really the struggle that parents have. And I work again with parents who are usually just finding out that their kid is queer. And I want to stop for just a sec to say I use queer because to me it's the umbrella of all LGBTQ plus identities. So when they find out that their kid is queer, even if they've been super supportive and open, it's still, oh, this is my kid. This is different than what I thought. So
well,
no.
and that's a good segue. We're going to talk about that for folks tuning in. We're going to talk about that in our Parent Tween Village exclusive conversation. You know, right now we're talking broadly, you know, what, and kind of like the societal constructs around this, but we're going to talk about that more specifically in our Parent Tween Village exclusive conversation about how to handle this more specifically when it's your child or in your family. We're going to dig into that a little bit more. But, you know, it's also not uncommon. I'm thinking of a friend that I have who has been in a heteronormative marriage and a couple of kids, and several years ago encountered something with a woman, and she's like, I had very conservative, if you will, beliefs. We didn't have the language when I was a kid, and now it's actually leading her potentially to divorce because her identity is changing. So this isn't just something that we need to be aware of for the kids in our world. It's something that, you know, it's a new conversation. I get that it's uncomfortable for some folks, but that's also why we have these conversations, because we need to educate ourselves and we need to explore so that we can be better humans.
A lot of the work that I do, we all have intrinsic bias, right? We all have
intrinsic what?
Bias.
Ah, yes.
So when you were identifying earlier, we were talking about different parts of your identity. With a lot of that external stuff, whether it comes to religion, community, culture, all of that messaging gets inside our brains, right? And that's who we know ourselves to be. And when something happens to ourselves or to someone that we love that is different, that is other than what we know to be true, we have to take time to shift and really examine, like, why do I believe what I believe? Where does that come from? You know, what stories do I tell myself that confirm that or, you know, prove that not to be true?
Well, and, you know, it's interesting. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day. You know, my husband and I are now officially full-time RVers. And I realized that kind of like the division of responsibility that we've had as we've undertaken this adventure has been very gender-based. But also because he's had much more exposure to heavy machinery and whatnot because of the professional adventures he's been on, or professional endeavors. But again, those are kind of societally imposed from a gender perspective. You know, he worked in heavy highway and construction, which is a very man's world, or very much a man's world. And so he's got a lot more of that arena than I do. And I recognize that I'm coming up against ideas of what I think I can and can't do because of how I identify as a cisgender female. So this is a very relevant conversation, not even about the sexuality side, but just like, what do we think we can do based upon the genders we've been culturally acclimated to live within?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do we do when we have, and again, we're going to talk about this very specifically in our personal families. What are some of the pieces that you would recommend to adults in general when either another adult or a youth comes out to them? What are some of the things that we can say to be supportive? And what are some of the things that we should avoid saying?
Okay. So when it comes to parents, right, and their kid comes to you and tells you that they're queer, there are 3 things that I think you should say. 1, thank you for sharing this with me. It takes a lot of trust, right? You have to know that that kid has been thinking about this for a very long time. It didn't just occur to them. They had to, summon up the courage to come and tell you, regardless of how good your relationship is. So thank you. 2, I love you. Period. Hard stop. No matter what. That's that. Everything on the other side of the but says that what you've just told me is wrong or is a problem and I have to overlook it. So I love you. 3, what do you need from me to feel supported right now? And then listen, because the kid may not know. The kid may need you to tell another family member or to not tell anyone. And so you really need to understand that you're letting that kiddo lead you on their path, on their journey, right? And you're going to be on a path along with them, but you have a separate path. Then you find somebody to freak out to if you need to, not your kid. All right. If it's somebody other than your child, it's very similar script, right? But one of the things that might change, you may not be saying I love you, depending on that relationship. You may be saying who needs to know and who can't know, right? If that especially falls in, what happens in education realm or in workplaces, it's a very, very scary time for people to come out. And so you need to know, who am I allowed to talk to and with about this? Who already knows versus who can't know because you might be in danger. And the other thing is, it would be amazing if every parent that found out that they had a queer kid was loving and supporting and affirming. It's not the case. And
it's not.
I can quote all kinds of scary statistics, but I think one that hits home really hard is the Trevor Project every year does a mental health survey. And the most recent one, the respondents, 40% of LGBTQ plus kids believe that they have a welcoming home. Only 40%. That may or may not be true, but that is their belief, right? That it's their perspective, and that's what matters.
Well, and that's why having these conversations is so important, because I see that disconnect all the time, not expressly in the LGBTQ plus community, but I talk to parents and they're like, my kid can come talk to me about anything. And they really, truly believe that they have created an environment in which that is the case.
Yeah.
And maybe they've done the best that they can. And I'm not like disparaging parents at all in this, but in that same family, you can go and talk to the youth, the kiddo, the teen, whatever term you want to use. And they're like, dude, I could never talk to my mother about X, Y, or Z. I could never talk to my dad about blah, 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 blah. And so my invitation to the adults who are tuning in is, if you hear yourself saying, my kid can talk to me about anything, pause and listen, because we may feel like we've done the best that we can to create that environment. And maybe the kiddo doesn't feel that for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But I really liked, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I really liked your point of the 3 things that you say, because really those work in any situation, not just in an LGBTQ plus coming out. Thank you. I love you. What can I do to support you? Or what do you need from me? Yeah. That works if you're navigating a partnership, a marital partnership with mental health challenges. That works with a sibling. That works with a parent. That works with, I just lost my job and I'm afraid to tell you. Like, no matter what the topic is, thank you for trusting me. I love you. And I like your point, Jennifer, about like, take off the no matter what, because that implies a condition for the love.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then what do you need from me? And I really like that you said, go find somebody else to freak out to, because it is not whoever it is that's in that space that has trusted you with whatever the conversation is. It's not their job to take care of your emotional response. It's somebody else's job. That's what your ride or die BFF is. That's what your therapist is. That's what your other person is for.
Parent coach.
Or your parent coach. Exactly. Okay, cool. So you were going to say something. Do you remember what it was now that I've interrupted you?
Well, I think all of this does apply, right? But I think Two things. One, when it comes to LGBTQ plus issues, we have to be really aware that society and all of the legislation is putting a different spin on it for the queer community, right?
Sure.
And so there are a lot of kids that are identifying as non-binary because they would rather, they feel that that's safer than saying that they're trans, and they're not wrong,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
I think there is, some special awareness. The other thing is, I would love for parents to have these conversations with their kids, regardless of whether they believe they might be queer, because maybe their best friend is, or maybe someone else in their class is and is being bullied and they need to understand more about it. So educating yourself and then opening that conversation with your kid, showing your child that you are going to be welcoming before and or if they need to come out to you is super important. And if I can tell you another really quick story, as I mentioned, my son is bisexual, but when he was growing up, I knew he wasn't straight, but I just figured he was gay, right? I grew up in the 80s, you're straight or you're gay, no worries. So when he was 19, he was away at college, and he's 28 now, 19, he was called the F slur on campus and wrote an op-ed for his college newspaper and came out as bisexual in that paper, in that article. And I was like, I don't understand. What is bi? How does that work? Clearly I have learned a few things, right? But at age 28, when I was like 6 months ago, so he was still 27, he and I were talking about his coming out process and his story. And he shared that growing up in a house where gay was fine, completely supported and welcomed, that we never talked about bisexuality caused him to really hide that from himself or deny it from himself and from me. And so again, even when you think you're doing, Maya Angelou's infamous, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. Right. So having those conversations with your kids, sharing with them what you don't understand and what their perspective is on what's going on.
Right. Well, and I actually have my own spin on that. That is one of my favorite sayings, but my perspective, or the way I look at it, is do the best that you can until you know differently, and then try differently, because this is also something where like do better. Like there's inherent judgment on that of like what's better, what's best, what's worse. When in reality, there are so many shades of gray in human interaction and in human relationships that what works with one kid, I mean, ask any parent who's raised multiple children, and they're going to tell you that what worked for one did not work for the other. Like it's not the exact same. So being able to look at it differently. What's your take? I know that, one of the things that I really work to cultivate within Parent-Tween Connection is a community where we can have any kinds of conversations. But there are obviously, there's going to be a part of our community and a part of the audience in the world that's very uncomfortable with this for the beliefs of it's a sin, it's immoral, it's this, that, or the other thing. Do you have any specific recommendations to families who do wholeheartedly believe that and who are faced with having someone in their family that identifies in this community?
Yeah. So I have a middle daughter who is a Lutheran pastor, and her husband is a Presbyterian pastor. And we have had a lot of conversations around this. And what I take from their very esteemed knowledge and expertise is that God loves everyone. Period. The end. All of the hate, all of the anger, all of the fear comes from what we've learned and what we've been taught by an organized religion, right? So I encourage families and parents to talk to people that are in faiths and in houses of worship that are affirming, and to really tease out what are the questions, where are the real challenges. I am by no means a trained, I did not go to seminary, so I can't have a deep conversation about the Bible, but there are others who can. And I think there are so many faiths that are welcoming and open to the queer community that it's, you need to seek out different perspectives and gain an understanding. And the bottom line is you have to, as a parent, as a person, have to recognize that if you are going to put your beliefs before the safety and affirmation of your own child, that's a choice.
It is.
And you're going to have to live with that choice.
Sure. Yeah. And there's outcomes for all choices. And
Yeah.
there's not one that's right or wrong, but I like that you say, seek counsel to folks who are in that arena.
I'm going to push back a little bit. If your kid comes out to you and tells you that they're queer and you kick them out with no support and no help, and 1/3 of the kids that are out on the street are there because their parents are unwilling to accept them, I would not say that that was okay.
I personally would agree. And I'd like to think that we could prioritize safety. And I'm also not in that situation. So we will leave that to them to make that call.
Yeah. I can help.
Okay. So we're going to transfer our conversation here momentarily into the private call for Parent Tween Village members. For folks who haven't joined Parent Tween Village, we're a private community expressly for parents of kids, primarily between the ages of 10 and 20. Those are very perforated edges, though. So if your kids are a little bit younger, a little bit older, definitely consider joining us. You can find more information at parenttweenconnection.com. That is recorded, and that will be in our membership site. So Jennifer, for folks who want to learn more about everything that we've talked about today, how do they find you? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
The easiest way to find me is at my website, www.queerallyship.com, all one word. I'm on Facebook at Queer Allyship, and on Instagram at @queer_allyship.
Awesome. And it's Jennifer Boudrye. I made sure to check that before we went live, so I didn't mispronounce it, because that's identity.
Yep.
Right? Pronouncing people's names appropriately and correctly is identity. It's part of who you are. So awesome. Jennifer, thank you. I think we've covered some really good foundations. I'm sure we'll be talking again. So appreciate the work that you're doing to support families and to support kiddos along the way.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.
Have a great one, everybody.